Hello and welcome to another episode of Raise the Bar. I'm Troy Haynes, the Sky High and Fly Guy. This is brought to you by Sky High and Fly Jump Lab. And we'd like to get you subscribing. So look down at the bottom after you've seen the content here on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And when you see us on Instagram, make sure you do a big follow. We're also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So we're just I'm just shamelessly pimping for myself. So I just was checking in today after doing a podcast last night with a young man named Kirsten, who is an amazing young jumper, 6'7" in high school as a senior, and then tweaked his hamstring and didn't get to finish his year. And this year he's come back with a vengeance. He just cleared 7 feet and a quarter inch and came in eighth place at D2 Indoor Nationals. So he's already improved over 5 inches, and there looks like there's more. So just thinking about that, and we're getting to crunch time here in Southern California, where most of my clientele is still training and getting ready for their league finals, and the run to state. So there's still a lot of work to be done. We're still just what mid to late March, but we still got 10 11 days left in March, and we hit April. Some big meets in April, but it really, the big run to state happens at what the last meet is the state meet, and it's May 31st. So a week before that is the Masters, a week before that is CIF finals, a week before that is CIF prelims. That keeps us inside of May. So there's still some work to be done, but it's heating up. So we got some big invitationals coming up here, both Arcadia, which is a big high school meet. We had the Arcadia Winter Championships back in February, but the big invite, which is again an outdoor meet, and still set in the spring. That's in mid-April, and that's always a big show. There's the top kids here in California. I believe the qualifying height for the guys is 6'2" or 6'3". And there's a couple different levels. The higher you jump, you can either be in the open or the invite. But it's a big deal. They try to get the top athletes from some of the neighboring states, sometimes as far as Texas. I don't know how far the reach of Arcadia goes, if they can pull people from back east. There's a lot of big meets back east also, but it's a big deal. And then just a week after that is Mount Sac, which is an unbelievable place. Ron Kamaka, a good friend of mine, was unfortunately passed away during COVID, and he had just seen that whole thing come to fruition. They were a couple years in building and rebuilding Mount San Antonio College. Always has that meet. It's a little bit more collegey than high school, but there's still a high school portion, and they do put a lot of effort and emphasis into that. But it's kind of always been a little bit more about college and elite, so it's a big deal that way. The timing's bad, I think, just to follow up Arcadia with Mount Sac. If you're kind of already getting ground down by the season, it's not a bad one to skip sometimes, but it's just such a beautiful track. I know Ron's looking down, just going, man, I love that place. Great big scoreboard, lots of Nike money running through it, and it's going to be a great place to go compete for a long time. The rumors have been that, maybe they would think about moving the Olympic trials down to Mount Sac. I would love to see that. This year, I'm kind of a traditionalist. I would kind of like to see the Olympic trials in 2028. I said this year. In 2028, I'd like to see those Olympic trials at the Coliseum, just because of the history, of the whole thing. But who knows, that they've been doing it at up in Eugene, Oregon for a long time. Nike Central. But this place was put together with Nike money, and then there's always the lure of the Coliseum. So we'll see how it all plans out. They're still kind of trying to rebuild and beautify the city, get lots of great transportation, fixing up the airport, trying to get the trains going, to and from all the way out towards Mount Sac. As a matter of fact, I'm sure there's going to be international athletes training there. Probably, be all around the Coliseum, USC, UCLA, Mount Sac, is relatively close. So a lot of exciting things happening here in the next 4 years, and just it's already 2025 and the summer is coming up fast, and then it'll be 3 years. So, but anyway, quick segue to, where things are going here on Raise the Bar. We're going to keep pushing forward and raising the bar in our services, putting an emphasis in video analysis, and also we're going to start publishing on YouTube some instructional videos on jumping. And so that's my heart has been there for a long time. I want to, continue to impart this knowledge to young jumpers. One of the reasons that I'm, passionate about this is that, in different times in my career, I went without coaching for stretches and was a little bit frustrated by it. And I have seen, the frustration on the faces of other athletes when they're competing at meets, and, just loving what they're doing and yet getting frustrated by the results. And, without a coach many, many times. I say it all the time, but one of the things I tell people that, when they call me is that they said, my son or my daughter just started high jumping last week, right? Coach throws them into the event, and they're athletic and they start jumping over stuff. And they're like, wow, you'd be really good if you had a coach, because a lot of places just don't. High school athletics, it's a rare staff that has someone qualified at each event. You've got your groups, you've got your shot and disc, so you need a thrower guy, right? You've got your jumpers, long, triple, high, and or sometimes throw the pole vault in there. If you're lucky, you got one guy that can cover all four of those bases for you. Okay. You've got your sprints, you've got your distances. So you've got a lot of different areas. Okay. And with the sprints, hurdles, not always the same person. So you can have conceivably there, you could have one per event, or, some coaches will have a pure sprint guy, and that might be 100, 200, 400, 4x1 and 4x4. And then boom, shut off, bam. Then we go distances, quasi distances, because at the world level, not a lot of difference between somebody running an 8 and a 4. It's amazing how fast everybody runs their laps now. But you've got the 800, mile, 2 mile, and you've got the thousands up there at the elite level. And steeplechase, right? Got all the distances, marathons. You've got, a lot of other stuff there. And again, there's the middle, what they call middle distance, is those 800 mile, 2 mile. And then when you start getting really long, then you've got another animal. So, and again, high, long, triple pole vault, unless the coach is exceptional, and there are some really good jump coaches out there that can do all. I have coached all four of those events and had a modicum of success. I'm not known as, long and triple guy. There would be, if someone came to me and said, hey, I'd really like you to help me, I'd be like, I can help you with the basics, but I wouldn't say, I'm one of those guys that's going to be able to, get you to super, super high levels. You never know. Sometimes you have a fantastic athlete and whatever you're teaching them just cooks and it works. I wouldn't call myself a great, awesome technician for long and triple, although, I think I've done that before. And pole vault is really, really technical. It's fun. I did it in high school, but again, without a coach. I was fortunate to watch the great Anthony Curran coach at UCLA for many years, and have been to some of his clinics and have been taught some of the basics by him. And they really work. They work well. I've had some athletes vault pretty well with that stuff, but I can't claim the nuances like I do in the high jump. So, but you may have somebody like that. And that brings up a subject we're going to talk about, but the commonplace hiring of the multi-eventer, because if you're a guy on a staff and, you don't have a lot of money in high school, which you don't, depending on a high school, they may give you one big coaching stipend, and maybe they give you a couple more, especially if the teachers are on staff. If they're not on staff, it works different ways in different districts. First of all, the stipends aren't that big, for track and field compared to like football or basketball. might be a little smaller. Um, some coaches will make $4,000 or $5,000 for the season. When you break it down by hour, it's really not that much. It's better than a kick in the face, at the end of the season if you get a big lump sum check. But it's nothing to live on here in California. It's not even really more than a couple months rent, maybe. Right. So yeah, why do we do it? The money isn't fabulous here. High school, junior college, or big college. I don't know what they're making at the big colleges, but I'm pretty sure it's less than six figures, unless maybe you go into the big conferences, right? The Big Ten, which is now 18 schools, the SEC, which is also quite a few schools. And they're highly competitive. And I think that money flows downhill from football and basketball into other sports, and they can afford to pay their coaches a little more. And they really like winning track and field when you're at Arkansas, LSU, Georgia, right? Alabama. They're all competitive. Those guys they keep going at it, just like it's football or basketball. So, and baseball, and everything else. So those conferences might have some money, and I don't know. There's got to be some. I'm kind of curious because I didn't go down that road. When I left UCLA, I did not become a graduate assistant. I was still competing, but I didn't think of that as a way to survive. To stay up on campus and go to graduate school should have been brilliant at the time. Get a degree, a further degree in kinesiology. I ended up going to Cal State Long Beach later and doing that, but later down the road, really, I've had not a very organized and wandery road. But anyway, the upshot of it all is that getting through your career and then turning your athletic career and then turning it into a career is and getting paid. So get back to the high school guys. So we come back to high school, and if you're putting together a staff, it depends. Now, if you've been around for a while, I've had some guys that I greatly respect that can put together staffs, will approach me about being the high jump guy. Sometimes just that, and more recently, just that. But every once in a while, hey, can you throw in your and do all the jumps? Sure. I don't, absolutely. The differences in training aren't that much, and everything's speed now anyway. So you have to be working on explosive speed, a lot of plyometrics, speed agility, learning exactly how to use your leverage and, things like that. So there's a lot of similarities. You don't have to, have, a killer knowledge of every last little facet. And you can probably, look up a lot of things online or, do that route, go to clinics, on and on. But the trend I was talking about was the multis. So if you hire yourself a multi, somebody who did the HEP or the decathlon in college, then they can supposedly do just about anything. It depends, right? Some athletes do not turn into coaches. They really are not that interested, or maybe they have trouble communicating what it is that they did. Maybe they don't even know what they did. There are some athletes that I've worked with that are not immune to coaching per se, but they just do it. And maybe they were just gifted with it. And, when you start trying to explain how to do it better, they're just like, hey, this works for me. I'm doing this. And they may compete very, very well and dominate, and sometimes maybe that doesn't translate into coaching, because you can be like, well, I don't understand why you're having trouble. Just do it like I did it, and that is a problem for some, I'm sure. And some of your better coaches surprisingly may not have been that good at it, but they always studied it and watched it and learned and, said, if I had done this or I tried that, and, you've got that school. We've seen, great examples of that in coaching in football. One of my favorite coaches of all time was, John Madden. And I believe John Madden was an offensive lineman. I'm pretty sure he played in college, and I think he played in the NFL, but he wasn't like a world famous guy. And nobody was like, oh my gosh, did you see John Madden the other day playing here? But he became a great coach and great commentator, right, for years. And, a unique view of everything and a good motivator and, an amazing coach. but, might not have been the highest level. And then there are a few, one of my favorite coaches to talk about is John Smith at UCLA, who was a world-class sprinter, ran the 400 primarily, and, came to UCLA and just started, creating gold medalists, and really knows his stuff. So there's some out there, that learn all the nuances as they're going through it and have talent and do the hard work and all those things that lead to success. So, but again, putting together that staff is difficult in high school. So getting through that mill, once you've got a coach, great. But a lot of times, like I said, my passion was to help those that didn't have a coach. And sometimes, multi or not, sometimes the guys that I've seen, we've had a couple here on the show. Coach Stone, was a distance guy and has become a really good high jump coach. If I remember right, I think he said he did some of it in high school, but there are times, Coach Stone aside, where the guy that ends up coming to coach, the head coach goes, "Hey, I can't get to the high jumpers. Can you go help them?" And the guy's like the shot put guy, or he's the distance guy, or whatever. And they're like, "Okay, sure." And they just go over there and, "Okay, try jumping higher next time, and try not to hit the bar with your foot." And it sounds corny, but I've heard that, and it's no fault to the person saying it because they're out of their element. Some people know it and own it, and some people will try to fake it. And I can usually tell within just a couple of exchanges between a coach and an athlete if I overhear if they have any understanding of what they're doing at all. And many times they don't, which is why I'm in business. So, you get people that are frustrated after a year, after 2 years, and they're not getting any better, or they're slowly getting better, but they see a lot more potential or whatever, and they just come to you and say, "Hey, can you help me?" And it's like, "Yeah, absolutely. I'm all about that. I love seeing people get better. I love giving, imparting, even if it's just one tip, if it could be one tip, it could be, get farther away from the bar. It could be try driving your hands higher up over your head, whatever little thing that I notice right away that they're not doing or are doing that they need to change. And, drive your knee across back into the curve. Little things like that. Sometimes they stick and just you have amazing results right away. A really fun time to do that is if you show up at a meet and there's a bunch of frosh soft jumpers, guys or gals, right? And you're like, they don't know me from Adam. I'm the guy holding the clipboard lots of times, but as they run up and miss, I'll just say, "Hey, that was really good. Just try this," and I just tell them, I just figure, why not? If they've got a coach already and they shut me down, say, "Okay, nothing lost. I just threw it out there." But lots of times I get them, to try stuff and it starts working. And then they're like, "Oh, okay." And then if I say, "Hey, that was great. Now remember, every time the bar goes up, you need to get a little bit farther away from it." And they're like, "Okay." And they try that and that still works. So it's fun. It's really the motivation behind this. And then as you get, better and better at your craft, and you start getting better and better results, and you start thinking, "Hey, it'd be cool to have a CIF champ." I've had a couple of those. It'd be cool to have state champ, work with me. I've had one of those. Had one at the high school and at the junior college level, and it'd be nice to, put somebody on a podium, like at a big podium, like at NC2As or something like that. Now, for that to happen, I'd have to end up at a school like that, which I'm getting late in my career. And a couple of places that I've interviewed at have been like, yeah, not really lucrative enough, to make that work. So that's one of the problems there, which is probably why I'm sticking with the privates. And I've had a smattering of collegiate and elite athletes come look me up and see if I can help them. So and that's very gratifying, and it's had its results. Barbara Pachoka from Canada, when she came to me, I think she jumped 182 or 180, close to 6 feet, and we worked together for a couple months, and she jumped 187, became the number one jumper in Canada. Still waiting for Barb to come back down here and get back to training. We're talking about Worlds in Mount Sac and some other meets coming up, but it's very gratifying. So what you're going to hear here in the future coming up is I have this huge encyclopedia of jumping stuff that's in my head, and I'm trying to organize it and then get it out, and I'm finding that doesn't always work. To get it all organized, my brain is not very organized, so I'm trying to write everything down and put it into chunks. So what you'll be getting here on Raise the Bar every once in a while on a rant like this, we're going to start doing a series, and we're just going to call it, the Sky High and Fly Guy on straights or on curves. Phase one for me is running straight at the bar. Phase two is running your curve. Okay, most people call that the J, right? Phases 1 and 2. That's how I do it. Phase 3 is takeoff. A lot of things as you're doing your curve lead to the takeoff. So there's some curve mechanics leading to that. But then what do you do once your takeoff foot hits the ground? So that's phase 3. So it'd be, the Sky High and Fly Guy on takeoffs. And takeoffs are fascinating because you've got so many different ways to do it. Now everybody has to jump off one leg, but the styles are distinctly, different. I always ask people, how do you jump? Are you a double armor? Are you a single armor? Lots of times they don't have a clue what I'm talking about. Are you a no armor? There's a new category. I think Miss Hall, the heptathlete from the US this last summer, I saw her get to the takeoff and both of her arms were already up above her head or moving, but pretty high up above her head as her foot was hitting the ground. And if you see people jump, lots of times they load their arms up behind them and drive them up as they're jumping. Well, as she was jumping, her arms were already up. And I was like, wow, that's different. And it's not the first that I've seen, but I've never seen anybody jump that high doing it. And she jumped well over 6 feet, as I remember. So there are new styles happening and people are making innovations and everything. So it's like, hey, takeoff and maximizing your takeoff is a great area. Lots of pieces to it. Flight, which is kind of interesting to call it a complete phase. And a lot of people say, yeah, now you're in the air. What do you do? But I have a couple distinct things that I teach about flight, and that is basically preparing for your layout, but when do you do that? And there's ways to maximize your flight. Okay. And obviously, as a high jumper, we want to get as much flight as we can. We're fighting the Earth's gravity. We want to get up and then at the right time, find a way to spin over the bar. Now, there's, again, lots of different ways of doing that. And the fun part for me is trying to match the style to the person, and sometimes you break things down and you start over, and other times you just accentuate what the athlete already does. I used to teach that it was impossible to scrape your foot and jump high. And then I watched a guy jump 7.5 at Mount Sac a couple years ago. And then I got a couple people text me and send in some things that said, Charles Austin scraped his foot when he jumped 7.10.5 at the Olympics, which is both American and Olympic record. And Sotomayor dragged his foot at 8 feet. And I'm like, okay, so open mouth, insert foot. And I had Fabian Delrid from Sweden was on, and he's a big foot scraper, 6'9", jumped 7.7. And you could see the dust cloud behind his foot when he scraped it. So, I would have cut off one of my feet to jump 7.7 back in the day. So, scraping my foot or not. And then I used to think that when you threw your head back into your layout, that you should either go the direction you were running or go straight back, but that going straight back in kind of the opposite direction was bad. And then I even said that a few times foolishly. I think I'm learning to keep my mouth shut. I'm not sure yet. But then I saw the great Stephen Holm jump 7.11.5 on video. And I'm like, you know what? He throws his head back into the other side and he kind of does a back side flip. And I've seen Dontavius Hill does that and some others that I've watched. And I'm like, you know what? They rotate over the bar pretty well there. It's not as detrimental as I thought. What I used to see was people doing that as they're taking off and a little bit too early. And it caused this weird reverse corkscrew thing. But once you're up and you're starting to spin, I don't think it makes as big a difference now. So we're always learning new things here at Sky High and Fly Jump Lab. But that is the fourth phase is flight, and the last one is, how do you get into a good layout position, and done a lot of work with that. But again, everybody's different, and there's all kinds of ways to get into a good position and spin over the bar. So we're going to be talking about that. And the other thing I want to introduce is where we take some questions from the people that visit the site, both on Instagram and they're on YouTube. If you have a question about technique, you have a question about training, you have a question about how to, get recruited out of high school into college, anything in the line of all of these jumps, it doesn't have to just be high jump. If it's, something that I know something about in long and triple and pole vault, I'd be happy to answer those as well. Sometimes the sprints and other things come up, I have never ever coached anybody that is a sprinter. Like, I haven't said, hey, you're a sprinter. I have coached one who I coached just prior to the Olympics. And this is back in 2024. So he was a long jumper, high jumper, and 100-meter guy. So we did do that. So technically, I just thought of it now. I actually have become a sprint coach with one athlete. Actually, a little bit with two. Okay. But, not my cup of tea, right? Not my thing that I hang my hat on. And, I wouldn't dare to go, hey, I'm way better than that guy. I'd be like, yeah, what are your theories on sprinting? I have had the opportunity and the blessing to be around some really good sprint coaches, both John Smith, UCLA, Johnny Durazian at Vanguard University is outstanding. Really is a good coach. His kids always get so much better all the time, and run great times right at the end when you need to. Very disciplined, very knowledgeable, and just a great guy, and does a great job with his kids. So I do learn a lot about that. And the stuff that I need out of sprinting is getting my guys to run fast at the bar or at the takeoff board, long and triple, or at the box and the pole vault. And if people don't think speed's important, you're not really watching. There are a few rare athletes that can just cruise up and jump over stuff at high heights. And, I'm sure there are some slower speed, long and triple jumpers that still jump far because they're just super bouncy, but there are a lot of guys that are really hauling the mail when they're running any of those high, long, triple, or pole vault. So, I think the speed is a little bit harder to control sometimes, but it's still an asset that needs to be harnessed. So anyway, we're going to be covering a lot of different bases here. So we're looking, opening up the questions. So I'll have to come up with it. If you guys want to send in some suggestions of what to call the DM bag here on Instagram, you can DM me your questions. You can send them through the website. You get to, Instagram. You can go to my website, www.skyhighandfly.jumplab.com. You go there. You get to that, and there will be a place to submit. Probably easier on Instagram, just do a quick DM. You can always send it in, even in a comment or on Instagram. So on YouTube. So yeah, we're going to do that. And we're going to start from time to time, just having not really a rant, but a brief presentation on, something pertaining to one of those 5 phases of jumping. And it may be strategy. It may be, something else, but that's where we're going here in these next couple of months as everything continues to intensify. We've still got some, call them lower level invitationals, and then we've got the Arcadia and Mount Sac coming up. So we're looking forward to those, and we'll be talking again soon. This is going to be a quick rant and out, but please hit the subscribe button at the bottom there on both YouTube, and give me a follow on Instagram, and send in those questions if you have them. I get them from time to time, and I've never thought about addressing them here on Raise the Bar. And then one of the guys that I listen to a lot is Colin Cowherd, and his his guy John, the Three and Out podcast guy. His name is escaping me right now, but he does a mailbag all the time, and it's just people have questions, and sometimes like, oh, whatever, and then other times, oh, it's a good question, and it opens up a topic that's interesting. So until next time, Troy Haynes, the Sky High and Fly Guy here at Raise the Bar. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.